G20 leaders meeting in Rio de Janeiro have called for a comprehensive ceasefires in both Gaza and Lebanon.
Well, they also welcomed all constructive initiatives supporting durable peace in Ukraine. In their joint declaration, G20 leaders called for a U.S. proposed permanent ceasefire in Gaza in return for the release of all hostages, as well as a Lebanon ceasefire that enables citizens to return safely to their homes on both sides of the blue line.
However, the G20 leaders failed to reach a breakthrough on stalled climate talks by not committing any funding to help developing countries cope with global warming.
Meanwhile, speaking at the session titled Social Inclusion and the Fight Against Hunger and Poverty, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that the global south was most adversely impacted by food, fuel and fertilizer crisis caused by these conflicts. So he underlined that the discussions at the summit would only be fruitful when the challenges and priorities of the global south are kept in mind.
On the sidelines of the summit, Prime Minister Modi met his British counterpart Keir Starmer. Prime Minister Modi and Starmer discussed ways to keep working closely in areas such as technology, green energy, security and innovation.
Also, to strengthen trade and cultural linkages, the Indian Prime Minister also separately met French President Emmanuel Macron and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Moreover, he shared a picture with US President Joe Biden and said it's always a delight to meet him. Meanwhile, Biden missed a photo with G20 leaders after the summit organizers proceeded without him.
Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau were seen arriving at the waterside location just as their fellow world leaders were dispersing. The White House said that the picture got taken earlier than planned due to logistical issues. And well, for more on this, we are now being joined by Dr. Charles Kupchan. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and International Affairs expert. Welcome to World DNA, Dr. Kupchan.
Good to be with you.
Dr. Kupchan, first up, talk to us about how the war in Ukraine and the conflict in West Asia took a center stage at the 19th G20 summit, with the G20 declaration outlining constructive initiatives for peace in Ukraine and, of course, ceasefire in Gaza.
Well, I think there are two looming issues that frame the Ukraine debate at the G20. One of them is the arrival in a couple of months of Donald Trump, who has said that he is going to make a determined effort to end the war, to negotiate a ceasefire, said he could do it within 24 hours. That's probably naive, but he will make an attempt to do so after several long years of death and destruction. And the other big development is the decision by the Biden administration to authorize deep strikes inside Ukraine using what we call ATACMS weapons. These are longer range missiles, go about 200 miles, 300 kilometers. And we don't know when or where the Ukrainians are going to use these, but it does have the potential to escalate. Mr. Putin has said if Ukraine uses these weapons, we will consider ourselves to be at war with the West. So these are two issues that are looming over the discussions in Rio.
Dr. Kupchan, what weight does this declaration hold when just a day prior, what you just mentioned, and the reports have also suggested that US has green-lighted the use of these ATACMS to target deep inside Russia, which is a clear red line for Russia. What bearing does this declaration have when this is the latest green light which Ukraine has now received, which only means there is going to be a major escalation which we haven't seen in the last nearly 3 years?
Well, I think what is motivating President Biden is that this is his last chance. And as a consequence, the U.S. is trying to rush the $7 billion in aid that has still not yet arrived, but been authorized by Congress and has authorized the use of these longer range weapons. By and large, the G20 favors a negotiated end to the war. most of the members of the G20 have not taken clear sides, especially in the global south. There's a sense that this is a war that has caused high energy prices, high fuel prices, but the declaration doesn't have a great deal of meaning. I think in the end of the day, what we are going to see unfold early next year is an effort by Mr. Trump to negotiate between Putin and Zelensky and to get some kind of deal. That's in the spirit of the G20 declaration, but between now and then, we may well see an escalation. And in fact, just over the last few days, we've seen one of the most significant attacks by Russia on Ukraine and Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
Dr. Kupchan, while we saw declarations on the wars, talk to us about how the G20 leaders failed to reach any consensus on the stalled climate talks.
Well, again, the backdrop here is the U.S. election and the prospect of a new U.S. president who may well yet again withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, and who has made it quite clear that he is not going to take seriously the prospect of human-induced climate change. He's appointing as the energy secretary an individual from the oil industry. He seems that he wants to go after the Environmental Protection Agency. And with the world's leading power unclear about its commitment to fight climate change, I think the G20 is in some ways in suspension, waiting to see what happens. One of the big issues that you mentioned in your setup a few minutes ago is the whole question of climate funding. Will the wealthier nations step up and meet their commitments to provide emerging powers compensation to help them with adjustments to climate change, to go green, to pursue sustainable development? It's going to be hard, I think, to see the U.S. stepping up to the plate once Trump is in power, and probably will be quite reluctant to make the kinds of financial commitments that we've seen under the Biden administration.
Dr. Charles Kupchan, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA and sharing all your thoughts on those questions. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Good to be with you. Good night.